What's up, guys? Thought I'd get outside for a minute, take a little stroll. I'm all about the conservation of energy, especially during winter. You know what I mean? Everything's doing that. From the birds to the bees to the trees. They're all kind of huddling up in a corner, trying to conserve what they have to make it through the most harsh time. Thought that I would go on a nice little walk today. Hasn't been too bad weather. Just coming at you from outside here for a minute. It's kind of a daunting task to get up the courage to, spend more than a minute or two out in the elements, especially when it's as cold as it's been in the last little while. You got to go and try and absorb what little light there is. So that's what I'm trying to do right now. Coming at you pretty frosty today, but it's clear enough out to get out and to go and get a little breather. Maybe absorb some sun even. That point of interaction between two things. The moment of communication, it's like the spark when electricity and current is jumping between two objects. It's what keeps us moving, it's what keeps us alive. So, out trying to get my fill for that. I'm dressed pretty conscientiously right now at the moment. I got a layer of moisture wicking thermals on beneath everything else. Long thermal long johns and some long thermal tees as well. And then over that, you can go with whatever style you want, but it's all about creating a space for your skin to breathe, but then also for you to actually have a barrier of warmth, a cushion, a buffer between you and the environment. You want to be able to sweat without having it just stick around and stay right near the skin. You want the fabric to be able to push it away from the skin. That way the cold doesn't have a chance to really, wreak havoc on you as it begins to freeze all those water molecules and in essence freezing you. I've made it through some winters with as little as $2,000 in my pocket. Really not spending much more than that. Just, being very conscientiously aware of every single expenditure of energy. When you're trying to conserve as much energy as possible, everything from your electronic use comes into question and comes into play. When your funds are that low, literally every expense counts. And you having to charge up your devices, or the amount of time you leave the lights on, racks up after a few months. And the heating expenses. So it's all about doing things the smartest way possible. But you got to add some flavor in there, otherwise the blandness of what you're doing, even though it's a sustainable living, will eventually kill you. Just bored to death, so you got to get out a little bit, you got to move around, and sometimes you have to be pretty whimsical by nature, not necessarily relying upon your logic or your rational explanation behind your actions. You just got to kind of go out and be a little bit ditzy every once in a while That way you can, you know, have some feeling in life. So yeah, you know, this is like a splurge for me. You know, I was talking earlier about being conscientiously aware of your energy expenditures. I'm somebody who likes to go and spend a lot of time at the gym, but there have been months where I've tried to cut up so hard through the winter months that in essence, I rendered myself incapable of having the proper buffer zone between my vital organs and the external environment. And those were some hard winters. You know, I looked great, but I wasn't necessarily in the best shape for the environment that I was in. And I've kind of wised up a little bit in regards to that. I'm very aware of what I've done at the gym for the week. You know, today, all I did at the gym was I went into a nice open space. I took a notebook with me and my iPod and listened to some music. And I laid down on a yoga mat, and there's a big window that faces where the sun comes up. And I laid there and listened to music and just wrote in my notebook. Wrote a short story, you know, and published that on YouTube. But, you know, for the day, that's all that I did. Just because I'm aware of, you know, the fact that me burning up all these calories is in a way kind of depleting my storehouse of insulation for when I'm gonna need it. When you're moving around, you're obviously gonna be dressing a little bit less heavy, you know, and when you're stationary, you're gonna really layer it up. And, you know, life is about a lot of things. It's not only just about doing things the best way possible. Sometimes it's about adding your own style to the mix, you know, because that's what life's about. And so just finding that balance of doing what's in season, but then also in your own season, your own flavor. You know, and if I had more money, it'd be a lot less like this. And kind of the counter argument to this whole explanation of how to live very frugal would be to find a way to create some more funds for yourself. And you know, I'm constantly doing that, but I'm kind of more of a fan of just being somebody who isn't a slave to making ends meet, you know, or even being above ends meet and being a slave all the same, because you might have more than what everybody else has, but that doesn't mean that you're no less of a slave because, you know, every day you're just going and doing the same thing, just kind of monotonous, mundane, and it's almost like you're dead. And I'd rather not have much, but have a lot of free time and ability to go and do what I please. You know, there's kind of some restrictions in regards to that because I can't do anything which is taxing heavily upon me financially, but that spawns a lot of creativity to find things that you can do in regards to the environment that you're in that is very frugal and conservative in nature, and it will force you to find a lot more joy in the small and little things and to be a lot more creative in regards to what you do with the space you have. It's kind of why I've decided to do this little YouTube adventure that I've been going on for the past, I don't know, 7 months here now. Almost a year, I guess, actually, because I started it last April, and it's March now, St. Patty's Day, just yesterday. I really haven't seen much come out of the whole YouTube thing as of yet. Whenever people ask me how much I've made, I say that I've made a lot of friends, because I have, you know, internationally, and that's been great. But when you're trying to do this for a living, you definitely have to plan ahead of time, like going on a vacation. You know, you got to be aware of what it's going to cost for you to live while you're doing this. For you to live while things aren't necessarily panning out in your favor. And who knows, maybe they won't ever pan out in your favor. It's kind of like going on a vacation, but then finding ways to capitalize on the fact that you're in an exotic environment and that you can share the experience with other individuals that may not necessarily be able to experience what you're going through at whatever time they are in their life, and finding some way to make, you know, pennies on the dollar. And hopefully over time it just all adds up and, you know, snowballs into this great mass of wealth. And really, right now, the only wealth that I can see is in that I've created, you know, 400 videos plus, quite the documentary online publicly where anybody can go and view what I'm going through. More so for science rather than financial gain, it seems. So currently I'm in Logan, Utah, one of the coldest places in North America, at least. I think that the coldest region in the continent was observed or recorded not too far from the central point of the city itself. Correct me if I'm mistaken, you know, but we recorded temperatures well below Alaska a little bit ago. I think last year we had a pretty harsh winter. And yeah, one of the little valleys up in the mountains up here near the ski resort Beaver, I guess, was some extremely low temperature that was recorded at one point in time that was record breaking, if I'm not mistaken. But just a very, you know, extreme environment. And to be able to live comfortably in this environment takes an amassment of a lot of goods over a long period of time. You know, if you're planning on coming to a place like this, you got to be well aware of what you're going to have to go through and what you're going to need to get through it. A lot of that requirement is in clothing, you know, but your attitude and behavior and actions all come into play as well. Like little things you got to be aware of is like your hygiene, for example. Showering dehydrates your body as your body tries to recover from losing all those essential oils on your skin. The differentiation of solutes between you and whatever you're washing your body with dehydrates you extremely. And also, you lose that protective barrier that you gained while moving to allow yourself to be able to more effectively combat the cold. So, you know, you gotta be hygienically aware, because obviously, if you find yourself in a state lacking the proper hygiene, you're really gonna find yourself in a nasty situation. Biologically, you're gonna run yourself out of homeostasis. And in finding yourself in a sickly nature, you're not going to be able to combat the environment. So it's about finding that balance as well. Myself, whenever I clean myself, I'm always aware of kind of regaining that layer of oils on my skin and, you know, going and jogging for a little bit. But then you don't necessarily want to go out immediately into the cold. You got to kind of slowly acclimatize and reduce your body temperature back down before you go out, so that way, you know, it's not all wet and it's something which has somewhat melded with your own environment. That way it can be a thin layer of insulation between you and what's going on outside. Hair is a big one. If you've got long hair, and this is something that I've only started doing recently, I've kind of had to learn on my own, really. Nobody really taught me, and I tried to look up things, but surprisingly I couldn't find much about it. You don't ever really want to get your hair wet if you have long hair. I mean, wash it twice a week at most. That's at most. Obviously, you're gonna know when you need to wash your hair, but what I do personally is I have a swimmer's cap, and I'll wear that when I shower. And when I do wash my hair, you're gonna wanna have a blow dryer, because you can get sick real quick by having some humid hair, some wet hair walking out in this cold. It'll freeze you up real quick and get you sick easily. And that'll ruin, you know, a week of your life, as you're pretty much rendered incapacitated just trying to recover from not necessarily preparing yourself properly for what lay ahead. Food, that's a biggie. You got to be always thinking about, not just what your body needs, but kind of what you're craving as well. Because like I said so many times before, it's much less about just living than it is about actually being alive. So I got to find some flavor in all this drab. During the months in which it's much more hospitable outside is when everything kind of gathers and they accumulate wealth and goods, and they store and stockpile all this up for when everything kind of dies off and shrivels up and everything becomes black and white. You gotta somehow store up all that color to be able to paint your life, so to speak. And in a lot of instances, people don't necessarily think properly as to what they're gonna need. For the most part, my diet's fairly carbohydrate heavy. I feel like I burn a lot of energy just keeping warm, especially when I'm in a house full of individuals that like to leave the thermostat fairly low, especially because they're not necessarily spending as much time at the house like I am. So it's fairly carbohydrate heavy, and all that stuff's super cheap. Spaghetti and rice, people. That's what the poorest parts of the world subside upon. There's lots of stuff that your body needs and requires that isn't necessarily found in that stuff. So if you're trying to maintain the most frugal lifestyle possible, I find that having a good multivitamin is essential. If I'm not meeting my needs nutritionally, then I'm gonna feel it. And though it might seem like more of an expense, it's actually going to save you money in the long run, staying healthy and providing your body with what it needs. Got kind of a weird mix of weather right now. It's pretty cloudy and overcast, but the sun's breaking through and poking through a little hole in the sky. And the snow is kind of coming down in a little bit of a flurry at the moment. I don't know if you can see it on the footage or not, but another thing is that the place that I'm living in is a pretty high altitude, and all of these things come into play when you're thinking about living here, especially very conservatively. I have eye protection on because the pressure of the atmosphere and the rays are all pretty extreme. I'm pretty certain that it's classified as a desert. Utah, it's one of the hottest places on the world, but then also the coldest at the same time. It's a very diverse and extreme place. So yeah, you got to get those nutrients from somewhere and find yourself a varied diet, taking advantage of every trip to the grocery store, and making sure that you're not only getting things that obviously are a little bit of a splurge, but things that are definitely a necessity. Maybe intermingling the two and finding creative ways to acquire both. That's when you've succeeded and accomplished success. Attitude and behavior make up a huge part of sustainable living. Being able to interact in a positive way with others keeps you warm to a certain degree. If you're shunned by everybody because of your behavior, you're going to find yourself in a pretty cold ass and isolated and dark situation. So it's best to find a way that you can socially interact with individuals. Obviously have your amount of alone time in your own space, but recognizing the space, which is everybody's, and and being able to play a vital role not only in the harmony of that space, the influence of it, but also in making it a better space for everybody and not only yourself. And the more that you do that, the warmer that you'll find your environment becomes as everybody kind of welcomes you with open arms. Housing is a big one. You know, right now I'm living in a 6-person building, so it's pretty much as cheap as it can get in regards to my habitation. It's like $100 a month, not including utilities and whatever, but it's pretty damn cheap. You know, and then on top of that, you take into consideration that my form of entertainment at the moment is pretty much as cheap as it can get as well. Just consists of like video games and every once in a while, weather permitting, going out and doing something fun. And all about finding, you know, like I said, those creative ways to enjoy what's going on and not necessarily focus on what you can or what you don't have, but what you do have and what you can do with what you have, and really trying to accentuate that. So yeah, the winter used to be a lot more hospitable place for me in my youth. Ironically, you know, you'd think that you'd kind of grow up and you'd be able to be more suitable to this environment. However, you know, in my youth, obviously I was enrolled in public school and whatever and whatnot. And when you're doing well in public school, society really embraces you and lifts you up. And when you're kind of living on the road like I am, everybody calls me a bum. You know, to a certain degree, you're kind of shunned and it makes it a little more difficult. So during those winter months in my youth, I used to snowboard a lot. Every winter, you know, almost every weekend I was up on the slopes. But as you grow older, that just becomes so expensive. It's like life is kind of this ironic thing, right? Where when we're capable of doing things physically, monetarily, we're deficient. And when we finally become monetarily able to do whatever it is that we please, physically we're unable, right? And so that's kind of where I am at the moment. See if we can't get a good shot of the mountains over there real quick. Looks like it's storming up there right now. Probably gonna come over this way here in a little bit. So yeah, you know, people will tell you it's all about moving, keep moving, you know, but it's hard to do that when you have limited space and limited funds, right? And you don't necessarily have someplace to go all the time. You got to really be aware of how much you're moving and where you're moving to. You know, if you don't have enough stocked up to support your movement, then you're going to find yourself in a bad situation. So you got to be aware of how far you can move with what you have, you know, and not overextend yourself. But then every once in a while, it's about taking that risk, you know what I mean? And it's about pushing a little further than you thought you could go. And eventually, what you'll find is that you've improved your range. And then ever since that point in time, you can move further than you did. People that are into fitness kind of have a misconception about what being fit is, you know? It's not always about heavy lifting. It's not always about light lifting. It's not always about cardio, whatever, you know? If all you can do is limited to things in the gym, then you're doing it wrong. I think it's kind of funny, you know, living in a place like this, socially, it seems as though there's always a problem with people being decent, you know? Living in a place like this, you're forced to be. Everything's covered up. It's not about freaking morals or ethics, it's about freaking survival. It's like if you're exposed, you feel that exposure. Well, you know, that's pretty much it. My phone's kind of running low on battery here. I'm gonna probably turn it off. I always like to keep some charge on it, so if it's starting to get low, I usually just turn it off. That way, if I find myself in a predicament where I need to use it, it's there for me to use. Also, you know, one other thing is that I don't think it's necessarily the best thing to be kind of like, every once in a while you see people out running and, you know, they're kind of fitness freaks. They don't necessarily understand that, you know, if you're in shape today, but 30 years from now, because of what you did today, puts you in a bad situation, then you're doing it wrong. You know, I was always kind of taught, and I grew up a wrestler, and so as soon as the winter season came along, you know, it's basketball season, whatever, everything moved indoors. And you find a space that isn't necessarily physically causing degradation on your organs, you know, your lungs and whatever. Perform your cardio somewhere comfortable on your body that's less extreme, rather than going out and running around in all the smog. The clouds and everything like that just trap all those toxins, the toxic air, and all the pollution. And you're just running around and breathing in that, you know. Go somewhere where things are able to dissipate a little bit better. There's some filtration systems involved. And, you know, it's kind of just having to deal with how it is at the moment in regards to our society. And then when things warm up outside, yeah, go for your jog, whatever, you know what I mean? But I was always taught that it's not necessarily the best way to go about it. I understand if financially you're restricted at the moment from, you know, performing those things indoors. But if overall fitness is your goal, you're probably doing yourself more harm than good. You know, and that's kind of it on my little expose about surviving the winter with a limited amount of funds. You know, it can be a really enjoyable time where you're able to experience some things that you can't experience anywhere else, and there's a lot of warmth in winter, but you just gotta, you know, overturn those rocks that I talked about and you can find it. Yeah, you know, I had good grades, and the ski and snowboard pass was only like $60 if you had above 3.7 or whatever. And now it's like you're above 18, you can fork over $1,500 if you want a season pass, and I'm like, hell no, cannot afford that. And ironically, if you were able to afford that, you'd be working all the time that it would take to actually be up on the mountain. So, like I said, a little bit of a contradiction there.